All. This is Dr. Mobeen Syed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So today with us all, we have Dr. Syed Haider. I heard him at the FLCCC conference. I met him as well. Um, I kept thinking throughout listening his presentation and meeting him that he is a very graceful doctor. Number one, and number two, he is a very competent doctor. He is just so on top of what is going on with the vaccine injury or long COVID, and then how to manage that and what are various ways to manage that. I am just so impressed. So Dr. Heather, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And tell us a little bit about your practice. I wanted to ask you this, and I'm going to show your site. And I wanted to ask that, has your practice evolved at all in any direction? What are the features of your practice at this time? I'm going to share your site here. So this
Yeah,
is mygotodoc.com.
that's a good question. So before, I think to answer that properly, I'm going to back up a little bit to what I was doing before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, I'd been working as a hospital doctor for 10 years. And I had become very disillusioned with modern medicine and the direction that it was going, and basically saw that we were just, we were managing diseases and not even doing that very well, right? And so I had started learning more about functional medicine because functional medicine, I think, addresses the physical causes of disease more effectively than conventional medicine. It's basically like regular medicine, but kind of on steroids. It's like a more advanced version of regular medicine. Some people may be familiar with House MD, it was a TV show back in the day. And he would, kind of like be a detective and figure out, okay, what's wrong with this person, right? Every case was like a mystery. And so functional medicine doctors are kind of like House, and in that they get to the underlying root issue on a physical level, and they correct that. And sometimes it works great, sometimes not so much. It depends on the experience of the practitioner, and sometimes luck, right? Just sometimes the universe aligns and you see something that other people don't, and you're able to help somebody on a physical level. Again, this is kind of the key. And so I started to institute some functional medicine practices in my off time when I wasn't practicing in the hospital, and mostly I was doing it in the Middle East, in Jordan, which is right next to Israel. And I was just seeing a lot of people in the local community who didn't have a lot of money, and they were, chronically ill. They might have diabetes or heart disease or seizures, just running the gamut of all the chronic illnesses. And these people, when I approached them with a lifestyle change kind of mindset, along with one of their local kind of like elders who they trusted, we found that it was very, very effective at like triggering lifestyle change. But what it took a few people sitting down with them for about an hour and a half, and showing them and like really explaining in detail how the medications they were taking were just kind of stringing them along. They were just kind of worsening the underlying issue without addressing the root causes. And then the pandemic hit, and I was caught up in this like tidal wave of people asking me for help. I would get requests all the time, like, I'm in Idaho and there's no other doctor license that I can find in the whole state who's willing to give me ivermectin, right? I need to prevent this. I need to treat this. I need to, I need ivermectin. I need hydroxychloroquine. I need one of these things. And you're the only person I can find. So before that, I wasn't looking to be extremely busy, but I got extremely busy very, very quickly. And then, I started hiring a lot of people to help me just deal with like the workflow, right? To streamline it so that I could see a lot of people, and I could streamline the prescription process and everything, and get people to help me send out prescriptions and deal with all these requests. And so I got caught up with that for about a year and a half. And then the long haulers and the vaccine injuries started coming in. And initially I was just kind of doing what everyone's doing, which is, okay, there's a protocol, let's prescribe the protocol, right? And, kind of one size fits all. Let's try this, let's try that. And then I started kind of leaning back towards the functional medicine days. And the protocol is kind of a functional medicine protocol. And it does recommend a lot of lifestyle changes. And so I would see each visit as an opportunity to try to pull people in the direction of lifestyle. And the reason is that lifestyle is far more effective than people imagine it is. And I like to, you have to kind of look at it from a certain perspective. So whether you believe in, kind of blind evolution, or whether you believe in like God directing evolutions, like an intelligent design situation, I think it's obvious to most human beings that there's a certain environment that we're optimized for, right? And so from an evolutionary perspective, you would say it's the environment of the Earth and the seasons and the temperature variations, and maybe even the Schumann resonances, the electromagnetic fields of the Earth that interact with our own bioelectrical field, and natural foods, and all of these things, in different areas of the Earth where our ancestors came from, were optimized for our bodies, and our bodies were optimized for those environments. And so chronic disease is really 99.9% of the time, it's a mismatch between us and the environment. And so what does that mean, really? So it's kind of like we're abusing ourselves in a way, right? So if you had a lab animal, right, in a cage, and this is what scientists do sometimes, they put up certain conditions, like they starve the animal, or they overfeed it, carbohydrates, or they keep it running on a treadmill all day, or they, get it addicted to something, or they train it to, or they keep the lights on all the time, right? So we would look at that and we would say, this is inhumane treatment. PETA would be on their case, right? You're abusing this animal, right? You're not letting it live in its natural environment. You're not letting it be healthy. We're doing that to ourselves, right? We are subjecting ourselves to an inhumane environment. And that is why we're sick, right? So really the ultimate reason is the environment. And you have to broaden your understanding of what the environment means, right? So you might need to include, for some people, they may be sensitive to EMF. And, there's mixed, research on this, and maybe some people don't quite buy it. Maybe other people do. There's also research on grounding that I presented at the FLCCC conference. And I think the theory behind it is pretty compelling. And it's been shown that when you touch the Earth, electrons flow into your body and they have an anti-inflammatory effect. And we evolved in constant contact with the Earth. And now there's an insulating layer between us and the Earth, even when we're inside our homes, even if we're barefoot, and especially in high-rise buildings, and especially when we're walking around on insulated roads and with insulated footwear. So we've subtracted that. We've subtracted most of the sunlight most of us were exposed to. We've subtracted most of the temperature variations, hot and cold, extremes that we would often be exposed to between day and night, or, winter and spring and summer and fall. And then probably one of the biggest elements is our personal relationships. People don't really understand how deeply important it is for health to just have good, intimate social connections. And then finally, an element that was actually mentioned not just by me, but by React 19's founder, is spirituality. So he listed one of their studies showing that, what are the top things that people report in surveys to be helpful for long COVID and vaccine injury. And one of the very top ones, one of the interesting things he said was that you get down to like number 6 or 7 before you even reach a supplement or a medication. The top 5 are all lifestyle things. And, one of these things that was reported is spirituality. And so I really see things, and this will probably turn off some people, but I just have to say it because it's kind of the truth that I believe in, is that good health is a subset of spirituality. So spirituality is not a subset of health or lifestyle. It's not like a piece of lifestyle. It's like the superset, right? So this is like ill health in our body is actually a reflection of something going on in the spiritual realm, mental realm, emotional realm. I think most people believe in emotions, right? We experience them. Most people believe in the thoughts in their head, but it's difficult to find those thoughts in your brain, right? So this is like it's another aspect of ourselves. And maybe if you just believe in, protons and neutrons and atoms, sure, maybe it's, a emergent process of those physical, characteristics. But subjectively, there's an experience of emotions which is separate from the analytical mind, right? And there's a subconscious, that there's all this stuff going on underneath the hood that we're not really aware of. Like sometimes you're driving for 2 hours and you wake up and you realize, like, how did I get here? I kind of forgot. I was carrying on a conversation or something, and I didn't really. Everything was just happening unconsciously, right? Because I'm so used to driving and I can do it well. Well, there's a lot of subconscious programs running all the time. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is that there's a lot more to health and healing than just tweaking some physical issues, right? And this is missing from functional medicine. It's missing from protocols. It's not something that really fits into a protocol. But I think at a kind of a higher level, like if you go from a 40,000 foot level and look down on what health is and what illness is, right? So illness, in my mind, it's a message, right, that there's something wrong, right? And it's not necessarily like, we oftentimes see it as an enemy to destroy, right? Something to fight against. I really see it as a friend that's trying to help you, right? So it's like knocking on your door and saying, hey, there's a problem here. And the message gets louder and louder, right? We ignore the message. We have a little bit of reflux, we have a little bit of insomnia, we have a little bit of anxiety, and we just keep pushing. And so we are very, very imbalanced physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, in a lot of different ways in the modern world. We're extremely imbalanced, and we're over on the side of the spectrum of like overdoing things, doing too much, thinking too much information overload, always on, always charging ahead, always active, right? And so from the Eastern perspective, it's kind of the yin and the yang. So yin is like feminine aspect of like resting, sleep, calming down, meditation, that kind of stuff. And yang is more the masculine energy, energetic, charging, fighting, succeeding, kind of aspect of energetics, right? But you need both to be healthy. And so in most Western societies, the illnesses that crop up are kind of this message to you that like, it's like your body's trying to hit the brakes really hard. It's like you're going 700 miles an hour, like if people watched the latest Top Gun movie, in the beginning, like the opening scene is Tom Cruise flying at like Mach 10 in this like, in this cutting edge, aircraft. And they weren't sure he could even reach Mach 10, right? So he reaches it and then he's like, you know what, I'm going to go even faster, right? And then eventually the aircraft just starts falling apart around him. So we've been doing that for our whole lives. We've been going Mach 10 our whole lives. And things are the wheels are flying off, the paint is chipping off, things are starting to break down. And our body is like trying to hit the brakes really hard. So it might be diabetes, it might be hypothyroidism, right? It might be chronic fatigue syndrome. It might be something, or it might be long COVID. It might be a vaccine injury, right? So something comes along and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's not the only problem. There are a lot of problems below the spike protein. And so you can remove the spike protein and some people don't get better, right? So some people remove all the microclots. They detox from the spike protein. They stay in their home all the time and they have no more spike protein left. And you can actually check for it indirectly or directly in some places. In Germany, you can actually check for the spike protein. And you might remove everything, right? You might remove all the problems and they're still wiped out. They're still tired. They still have some of the symptoms. And it's like you haven't addressed the really underlying thing. And so I get a lot of patients who have been doing this their whole lives. They've been overdoing it their whole lives. And they think that they're doing something that's normal, right? They think that this is a normal amount of work. Everyone works this hard, right? And why do they think that? They think that because they've been feeling healthy until now, right? So they've felt healthy for the last 30 years while they were not sleeping well, not eating well, not taking care of themselves, right? And what's going on there, right? Like there's an organ reserve, there's a health reserve that you have. It's like a bank account of health that you have, like a health savings account. And you're drawing down on it. Like instead of adding to it, or instead of keeping it stable, instead of like drawing some but adding some, instead of keeping it stable, you're drawing down on the health savings account, and eventually you hit zero, and then you overdraw the account, and now you're sick. Okay, so then you do a little bit to like bulk yourself up. Maybe take some ivermectin, like gets rid of some inflammation, binds to some spike protein, and then you feel better, right? Now you're maybe have a few dollars in your account. Maybe the illness is kind of like gone, but then like a big stressor comes along and suddenly you're sick again, right? Suddenly you're like 10 out of 10 severity, and then you work yourself back up and then you're okay again. And the disconnect for people is like, well, I spent 30 years living like this. Why can't I go back to living like this? And that's the reason. The reason is you've overdrawn the account and you haven't built up the reserves even enough to like be able to sustain like a regular stressor, right? Something that normally you should be able to manage. And so how has my practice changed? Like a really long-winded way of answering that question is that I'm trying to bring this aspect into it. And so what we did is we created a long COVID group coaching program, because a group setting is the most effective way to instill the desire and to actually get people over the hump of starting a lifestyle change. It's a very powerful way of doing it. And there's research that shows that. And I mentioned it in like a half a second in my FLCCC presentation. So we have that. And this is all based on what I went through. I had long COVID, very bad. and I just used lifestyle to get over it. And then I was left with like a 45-pound weight gain from the pandemic and from, all the stress and not sleeping well. And I knew what was doing it, right? And I tell people like stress and not sleeping well can make you gain weight. And like, if you correct that, you can lose weight. And they're like, really? Like, it's hard to believe that it's not all about calories and exercise, right? And calories out. That like there's hormones involved, and there's other things involved, and there's like emotions involved, and there's stress involved, and they work on a physical level. Sure, I mean, it is at the end of the day calories in, calories out, but the calories out are influenced by the hormones in your body, and the hormones are influenced by your thoughts and your emotions and the stress that you're under and how much you sleep and all of that. And so I fixed that problem. First I fixed the long COVID, and then I fixed the weight gain. I got rid of the 45 pounds that I gained. You saw me, I'm fit and trim again, alhamdulillah, thank God. And then we spun up, we just started this lean vitality program to help people do the same thing with, in a group coaching setting. So, these have, most of my practice is still like, okay, people come to me and I prescribe things and I try to pull them in the direction of lifestyle, and oftentimes they're not interested. But the long haulers and the vaccine injured, they're more ready to hear this, right? And one of the messages I had at the FLCCC conference was, you have to try it, you have to do it yourself in order to really be convincing when you tell somebody else, right? Like, people can sense, right? Like, you can't be the smoking, overweight, no exercise, overworked, stressed out, frazzled doctor telling somebody to meditate and not smoke and not drink and sleep better, right? They're not going to buy it from you, right? It's not going to be convincing. So, the line that I had was, conviction is contagious, so you have to be really convicted yourself that. And what is it with me is that I've done it on myself, but I've seen a lot of other people do it, right? So I saw it in Jordan, I saw it here in the US, I've seen it in my patients. The case I presented, he basically didn't want to use medication. He just wanted to try lifestyle, and he got over his long COVID just with a few lifestyle changes, not even like everything he could have done. But then some things that spoke to him, which, are more likely to have a placebo effect when you yourself are kind of invested or you kind of believe in them already. So I spoke a little bit about placebos, and the final key thing, again, kind of linked to that presentation and also how I'm trying to change my own practice, is communication. The way providers communicate with patients is it's far more important than I ever thought. And you have to really like examine the words that you're saying to people, because it's almost like the way voodoo is depicted in Western media. Like voodoo, when I was growing up in the movies, it was depicted in this way that if you don't believe it, it's not going to affect you. If you believe in voodoo, then you can be harmed by it, right? And so this is how it's depicted in the mainstream media, at least when I was growing up. And, the words from your physicians can have this like negative voodoo on you, right? What's called a nocebo effect, the opposite of a placebo effect. And there's some very, once you start to understand how this works, you see it with most providers that you go to, that they're instilling limiting beliefs, or they're instilling these suggestions into the subconscious mind. They're coming from a position of authority. That's why that's why they have this effect on people, especially when it's like the person that like, they've tried all these other people and now they've come to you, right? You are the one, right? Who's going to help them. And they've invested it all, right, into seeing you. In that situation, if you're not careful about what you say, you could like trigger nocebo effects. You could trigger side effects, right? And we've seen this in placebo research. When the provider knows that there is a side effect and they think they're giving the active drug to the patient's more likely to get the side effect when they are counseled that this side effect could happen to you, right? So this is one of the keys. Like when you're telling somebody about possible side effects, the better way of saying it is like some people, like not you, but some people over there, other people sometimes experience some side effects. It's pretty rare. Some people do, but you are very likely, like most people, not to experience side effects, right? And so there's these little things that seem like they're insignificant, but people who are aware of this, there's different terms for this, neurolinguistic programming, or even like a hypnotic kind of suggestion. But people who understand how language works and how it speaks to the subconscious mind have seen it in their own practice and their own patients. There's a great book, Healing Beyond Pills and Potions by Steve Bierman. He's a practicing medical hypnotist and also NLP, but he worked in the ER for many years. And he was able to, just like with a few choice words, he was able to like avoid pain when he did suturing, even when he like did childbirth, when he gave birth to children, or when he helped women give birth to children, facilitated that, when he gave injections to kids, and so there's a way, like, you can make somebody hyper focused on the thing that's about to stab into them, and that focus actually allows the pain signals to be felt and appreciated, right? And for you to suffer a little bit, right? Or you can kind of distract them, or shift their focus away from that, and they won't experience pain. So like, that's just a simple example, but you can have far more complex and more profound examples with long COVID, or with side effects from medications, or even with like disease itself, right? Like, you can actually create illness or perpetuate it by instilling a limiting belief in somebody. For example, like, if you overtest, if you you test somebody for Lyme, like they Lyme wasn't even on their radar, right? Okay. And they know they have long COVID. They come to you with that story that I have long COVID, I have the spike protein, it's harming me, And so part of that harm is a belief. It's a nocebo effect you are inflicting on yourself because of the belief in the harm that's coming from this thing. And so I'm not saying it doesn't have harm. It does have harm, right? But you can multiply the harm with your mind. But some people come and it'll be like, okay, I'm not getting better. Okay, let's check for all these other things. Then you find some other things, right? And then they kind of take that on and they become invested in this new story that I have Lyme, or I have mold toxicity, or I have this other thing, or I have this genetic abnormality that makes me a poor methylator, and that becomes a limiting nocebo effect on them, right? So it's contributing to the illness more than it would just on its own if you didn't know about it, right? It's like supercharged negativity, a negative effect that it's having on you. And so I don't like to tell people things like, if you don't do this, you're never going to get better, right? Like, I hear this from some providers that, like, if you don't treat Lyme, you'll never get better, right? How do you know, right? Like, you don't know for sure, right? Like, I've seen people who had Lyme, right? And they never addressed it and they got better. They got over it. The people who have Lyme, usually they were fine first, right? And then they got sick. And it's not that like they got sick as soon as they got Lyme. They might have had Lyme for years and been able to control it, and their body kind of suppressed it, and they were perfectly fine. They had no symptoms. And then, all those straws built up on their back, and finally one straw broke the camel's back, and maybe it was Lyme, or maybe it was COVID, or maybe it was something else. And now it's manifested, right? It's a manifest problem, but it could be, put back under control. And I know I'm going on and on, so I'm going to let you.
This is awesome. Actually, this is such an important topic, especially. I would give you an example in a second, but I want to first share a personal experience of words as magic, and if you believe in them. I was very little, I think 7 or 8 years of age. And I remember 9 years maybe. I remember I was sitting outside my home and there were some people working. There was some construction going on in our home, and I was sitting in the yard and I was trying to sing. And one of the workers pointed at me and said, "This boy has a really ugly voice."
Wow.
And it became such a, those words just became part of my life. And after that, ever I try to sing, for example, I would tell myself that I have a really ugly voice. Or when somebody say, let's sing, when you're sitting together in a group and they say, all right, let's try some song. And I would just simply say, I have a very ugly voice. And so then a few years ago, I realized that that one sentence had me captured from 9 years of age till now. And so I give that example to my students to say, if this is not an example of black magic, then what is? The words that capture someone forever. And at the end of the day, it was on me as well that I believed it. But maybe at that very young age, I was not sufficiently trained to figure it out and help myself. So I totally agree with you that the mindset and the words and the suggestions also matter. I am going to ask you a question related to this topic. So I know I want to go to the long COVID and vaccine injury discussion. However, this is also very important. A few days ago, I had Raylan Agel here as a guest, and she has been presenting the stories of MECFS patients or chronic inflammation patients or long COVID vaccine injury now, I believe. And they discussed how they recovered with meditations, with uh, auto suggestions, with slowly bit by bit improving and then helping themselves even without medication at times, and having a very good functional life. And the result that happened on my channel, which surprised me, was that there were about 4,000 people who just unsubscribed. And their uh, comments that I received were that you, Mubin, is a biology person. You talk about biology. There is an actual problem in the body. There is a pathology going on. How could you have someone who would say this can be meditation and the mindfulness and the go slow? She mentioned type A personalities as well, and they're going fast. And then so someone said, "Are you saying that we are ourselves to be blamed for what is happening to us?" And it became a very interesting thought thinking experience for me, that sometimes when there is a biology involved, we are not trained to superimpose the mindfulness, the spirituality, and then connect these two to say that is what makes the whole picture. My question to you is, as you move in this direction where lifestyle, the spirituality is more part of the management as well and lifestyle as well, how does a patient who has a biological a pathology going on, how does that work with spirituality or with mindfulness or with this lifestyle differences?
Yeah.
What is your experience from practice?
Sure. Before I answer the question, I just want to say that, with this whole, this discussion that we had earlier about how you need to maybe avoid what, certain practitioners, and like be careful with the way that practitioners speak to you, and what you let yourself hear from somebody like a practitioner. You also need to edit your experience yourself in terms of like social media and the things that you see, because we don't fully understand how things work, right? We don't fully understand how people always like heal always, and we understand a little piece of it. Okay, so it's kind of like a vast darkness, and there's a little street lamp, and we see a little bit of light here, and it's like, the person searching for their keys, and you ask them, why are you looking here? And they're like, this is where the light is. And it's like, well, that's not where you lost your keys, but I can't see anywhere else. Right. So this is what we're doing is, scientists and physicians, we're looking where the light is. And oftentimes you'll go to a doctor and they'll run all the tests, right? Which is like shining the light where they know to shine it and how they know to turn it on. And they don't find anything wrong. And they tell you, oh, it's all in your head. It's all a functional problem. And so people feel gaslit, and they feel like, I'm kind of saying a similar thing, right? Like I'm blaming them. I'm telling them it's all in your head or something. And that's not what I'm saying. You will find a problem. You will find actual chemicals out of place and things out of whack if you know where to look, right? And so with long COVID, we can usually find the problem that your PCP can't find, right? We can find the interleukins or the VEGF or whatever that's elevated, because they just don't have access to the tests, or the tests are too expensive or whatever. So we can find the microclots. We have access to the microbiome testing. We can do all of this testing. We can send your stuff to InCellDX. We can get the S1 subunit in the monocytes. We can detect that, right? And so I'm not saying that there's not something actually physically there. And so maybe people misunderstand what the placebo effect is. So it's not like a subjective experience. It's not just that you think you feel better. It actually makes you better. So if your CRP is up, the placebo effect can make it go down, right? If you're not getting enough dopamine in your brain as a Parkinson's patient, a placebo pill can increase the dopamine in your brain. It doesn't make you feel, it's not a subjective experience of I think I'm better, right? Like my experience of reality is better, but I'm not actually better. You are actually better. Okay. So I'm saying that this can actually fix the problem. And so what does that mean? It means that, yes, part of the creation of the problem is coming from you, right? It's not all from the spike protein. It's also how you respond to the spike protein. And so your subjective experience and your interpretation of that is what stress is, right? So stress is not an objective thing. So like for some people, something that's extremely stressful might be no problem, or might be some like a joyful experience for somebody else, right? So it kind of depends on the context, how it affects you, and then how it affects you mentally also affects your body physically, right? So your mind sends all these chemicals all over your body. It changes your gut bacteria, it changes your synapses, it shifts everything, right? So this, I'm not like discounting physical reality, right? We are
Mm,
absolutely, accepting the fact that physical reality is real and there's cause and effect in the world. But the cause that's been missing from most equations, which is a really big cause. This is the main message here, is that this cause up here, your subconscious and your subjective experience, your emotions, what you choose to think, whether you feel gratitude or anger, all the time, all of this stuff that you have control over can override a lot of the physical causes. The physical causes are actually far smaller and far less effective than this cause up here. So I think that's the main message, that people seem to think that this is just a little piece of the puzzle, right? This is actually most of the puzzle, right? So, and there's a lot of examples of this, right? So one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation to the FLCCC was the biggest endpoint you can possibly imagine is death, okay? It doesn't get bigger than that. And there were two studies where they found that older people who perceived their health to be really good were 6 times less likely to die than people who perceived their health to be bad, regardless of whether their health was good or bad. That's the most shocking thing here, right? So you could perceive your health to be very good, but if somebody checked you, it wasn't actually good. Maybe you had diabetes, maybe you had cancer, maybe you had, all these issues, but for some reason you didn't think you were unhealthy, and you didn't die, just like somebody who actually wasn't unhealthy, right? Or you could have actual literal good health, right? Like you check everything and the person seems to be in great health, but they perceive themselves to be unhealthy. That makes you more likely to die, right? So the belief was more
mm,
important than like physical reality, like what was actually like the
mm.
actual recipe that you have at hand, right? So it's almost like
Makes sense.
you put together all these ingredients and you get a fantastic cake just because you believe it, right? And it
Mm,
doesn't depend so much on what you put into the cake. And so if that is the case for death, it's certainly the case for chronic illness. And there's a lot of studies that suggest this fact. And so I think that is a short answer. Maybe it's not. And to answer the question, are we to be blamed, right? I think that you have to accept some responsibility, right, for where you're at. And if you're not willing to do that, that's a roadblock for you, right? And so I wouldn't try to like bang you over the head with this issue, like, yes, you're to be blamed, but I would try to like, help you understand that you do have more control than you've been told that you have. You've been like limiting yourself because of the
mm,
beliefs you've been, instilled with your whole life.
mm,
But now you are an adult and you can shift those beliefs. You can change those beliefs. Yeah, sure, you were messed up by your parents, you were messed up by your ancestors. Maybe like you're the fifth generation after some horrible thing happened, and you're having epigenetic, negative effects. Yeah, all of that stuff is possible, but you still can take responsibility for your own health, and you can start to believe, and you can change this belief depending on what you choose to read, who you choose to hang out with, who you choose to listen to. You can shift the belief in the direction of, I have more power than I thought I did.
I totally understand, and thank you very much. I'm going to give you an example of this dialogue that was happening. So Denise has been a part of our community for a very long time. So Denise, thank you for hanging around. So Denise says, despite my positive beliefs, they didn't keep me supposedly my mild COVID infection, from reactivating EBV and giving me a positive ANA. So what did I do wrong?
But I'm not saying so. So I don't know, right? Like I don't know your whole story, but there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, right? So there's, for some people it may not be a limiting belief, right? Maybe you are super well adjusted and you never had any problems growing up, and you have no limiting beliefs, and nobody's inserted any like things into your subconscious mind. Maybe there's something else, right? Like maybe it's a different piece of the puzzle. Maybe it's an environmental piece, right? So I ask people, how's your diet? How's your lifestyle? And everyone kind of says it's pretty good, right? Most people perceive their diet and their lifestyle to be pretty good. But maybe it's not. Maybe you have a particular sensitivity to glyphosate or pesticides or EMF or mold or Lyme or whatever, like all of these
I'll
other
give
things.
you an example. So sorry for the interruption. A few weeks ago, I felt that I was becoming pre-diabetic. And I looked at my lifestyle and I found that I'm not exercising enough. I just coming out of pandemic. I'm not walking enough and all those. Plus I eat carbs. So came Ramadan and I just quit food and I reduced carbs and I actually lost 10, 12 pounds and I just became fine for my blood sugar as well. A few days back, when I came back from the FLCCC this Sunday, I thought, oh man, I am actually doing very well. So why not I just eat some carbs? And I ate carbs for a couple of days. And today my fasting sugar was 101, and meaning it started trending backwards, upwards. And that just simply told me that my own lifestyle choices are contributing as well. And I, being a doctor, I'm actually aware of some of these to say that, hey, this is my choice and I was that way. Now this is a fair question to say, for 50 years I ate carbs and nothing happened, but as you said, that just takes out the reserve that you had, and now every little carb would create an impact. So the next question that I have is, and I want to make sure that we tie this loop, biology and the pathogenesis, that also has its effect. For example, the virus landed in our body, that caused damage, regardless of our positivity or not, that has a contribution as well, correct?
Yeah, of course. So there are physical causes, right? A bullet hits you, it's gonna, go through you, and it's gonna cause harm. Spike protein is going to cause harm. The spike protein hits some people and it doesn't like manifest as an illness. It could be, subclinical dysfunction or inflammation, or it could be nothing, right? Like some people may be able to tolerate it and clear it out. So other human beings have been able to tolerate it and clear it out and get rid of it and not be harmed by it. So if another human can do it, you can also do it. But sure. Like obviously, it does have some physical effects on the body. It can trigger microclots. It can trigger inflammation. It can do a lot of damage. I mean, couple of the slides were just a list of pathophysiology that we know of caused by the spike protein. My point is that your body can overcome that, right? So it is possible if you do enough things right to tip the balance back into health, right? So it's a matter of adding up enough positive things to the right side of the scale to tip the balance back towards health. And you don't have to do everything right, right? The more things you do right, the better off you'll be, and the more reserve you'll have, the more like harm you'll be able to absorb without actually feeling bad, right? And the longer you'll live and the happier you'll be, and the longer your health span will be. And it doesn't have to be difficult, right? So this was another kind of like message of mine that, I've tried before to like, you think of all the things you should do and it's like overwhelming. You just have to choose one very tiny little thing. And for me, it was just imagining myself better, skinnier or healthier or whatever, just having like a clear visualization and then feeling grateful for it as if it had already happened. And this is a very like pleasant thing to do. And what it seemed to do for me, just it made me more positive and it made me believe it could happen. And I think your subconscious is like, yeah, like I know what I need to do to get there. And so eventually, like you start to feel an inclination, a natural inclination to do like the next thing, right? For me, it was just like sleeping a little bit better. And so I made some changes. And so you start to have a snowball effect. The changes get bigger and bigger, and it gets easier and easier to make them. And after like a very short time, for most people, they'll find that they're doing all these different things that they thought they wouldn't be able to do, or they thought it would be too hard to do. So it's just about making a really small change. A small group can help, but you can do it yourself too. I did it myself. And so that's important. And I kind of lost the thread of the original question, but
Yeah, so actually, thank you for answering this. I'm going to add a comment to this one. One of my nieces is vaccine injured, and she is your patient. So thank you very much for caring for her condition. A few days ago, she said that, hey, I had a relapse. And I said, please reach out to Dr. Haider, see. And at that, of course, I was curious as well. And I said, so what is happening? What happened? What are you doing? And it was very interesting that she said, I know how the relapse occurs. what do I do that the relapse would occur? And I have now learned to how to shorten it. And what do? I take a rest immediately. Try to relax immediately. I try to see if there is any stressor in my environment. I reduce if I have done too much exercise. So she had a bunch of triggers in the lifestyle, and then she had a bunch of exercises or lifestyle changes to do to say I can actually now shorten this, but for a few days I'm still having some visual issues and I think I should request LDN or talk with Dr. Heather. So that was actually very interesting. This used to be the person who would spend 6 months in vaccine injury on the bed
Mm.
and thinking, I am done. She's a young woman. I am done. I do not have a career anymore. I do not have a life anymore. I thought I would marry and have a family and build a great life. And now she was saying, I'm done. From there, she has switched back to that I want to have a great life again, and she is recovered as well. So I think there are lifestyle things that we all know about ourselves that would contribute. Now, if we can switch gear to a different kind of a topic set, and that is the what is the current state of vaccine injury and long COVID? So I want to first ask you this question. In your practice, of course, there was a time that there was a lot of COVID. So I'm thinking that COVID patients are not as many. Is the vaccine injury and long COVID, they have increased or there are just some? How is your practice's composition or epidemiology look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of people who just want to have something on hand in case they get COVID or as a preventive, post-exposure prophylaxis. So those are some, simple prescriptions that we send out quite frequently. But in terms of like people who are actually sick, it's mostly, long COVID vaccine injury. And then, occasionally there'll be somebody who catches COVID and it's not a serious problem, but they want to take care of it and get a prescription for it and kind of hand holding through that experience, and we do that as well. But yeah, most of the people who are coming now who are actually sick. They don't want to just prevent something or take a prophylaxis or just have something on hand. Those are long COVID and vaccine injured patients, and there's a broad mix, right? Like it's all ages and elderly, middle aged. Mostly, it's like probably 30 to 55 in that range for me personally. And I think probably a pretty even mix nowadays. Like it used to be mostly long haulers for whatever reason. I don't know why, but now it's pretty even long haul and vaccine injury. And I mean, I think if the disease has any meaning, right, in a larger, in a larger context, it's really that people have been burning the candle at both ends, and this is the thing that they need to try to understand in order to deeply heal for the long run, and not just be on this roller coaster of like, okay, I got better and then I went back to the same old lifestyle and then I get worse again. Maybe I get COVID again, or I get something else and it triggers it to come back, or I have to move, or some stressor in my work or something knocks me under. To really deeply heal, you have to kind of commit to like making sustainable lifestyle change. And I'm not saying that you won't be able to work hard and have tons of energy, right? But you will if you invest in yourself properly, right? So can you like just sleep 6 hours a night for the rest of your life? Probably not. You need to realize that it was drawing down your health savings this whole time, right? That it wasn't that you were perfectly fine with it before. It's that you didn't realize that it was harming you before. And now you can see the harm, you can feel the harm. It was harming you before, you just didn't notice it. You were just drawing down your savings. And so now you have to like finally accept the fact that human beings need 7 to 9 hours of sleep, right? On average, right? Maybe you need 9, maybe you need 10. I don't know. Maybe for a few months, you're going to need a lot of sleep, and then you'll be able to like normalize it. Maybe you'll be able to like settle down at 7 or 8 hours. I don't know. And so that's the real issue, that like you need to eat healthy, you need to sleep, you need to get sun, you need to get grounding, maybe buy a bed sheet or something that's grounded if you can't go out and stand on the ground. Maybe you need some cold or some sauna. Maybe all your ancestors are from like sub-Saharan Africa, and you've been living in Canada for the last 20 years, and you've never gotten hot in 20 years. Maybe you need a sauna, right? Maybe your genes are just like crying out, give me some heat. And so you need to fix the environment if you want to really deeply fix the problem. So a lot of people will get 80, 90% better. Okay. This is very common, right? So it's pretty easy to get to 90%. And most people are happy enough with that. And they're like, you know what? I'm just going to go back to my life and deal with this last 10%. And so that I feel like I haven't actually benefited them because I've kind of given them like a shot of adrenaline in the arm to like somebody who was nearly dead and like get them over the finish line. And then they decide to start another race right away, right? Because now they feel like they have energy again. But they're headed for a fall, right? Like they already fell. And since they're continuing what has really been feeding the illness, right? All the different straws on their back, not just the last one, which is the spike protein, but you remove the last one and then you help the camel get up again, but it's still overloaded. And it's just waiting for another straw to drift down and make it collapse again. So this is where functional medicine goes wrong, right? When it just addresses the physical issues, and sometimes it can delete the issue and get you going again without fixing all of the underlying issues, right? Like not just physical lifestyle issues, but also mental, emotional, spiritual issues on top of it, which you can think of as part of lifestyle. And when you don't address them, it's going to show up later again, right? You haven't really fixed it at a deep level. So I want deep healing for my patients and for humanity. So one of the things that we're doing is not just like, you can come and join the group coaching, and pay for it and be in the group and talk to the health coach and talk to the other people. But we're trying to make like a free version of this where people can start up their own groups and kind of like a 12-step program. It's not 12 steps, but similar idea where you try to like get rid of an addiction by going to a group, every week and just kind of sharing stories and like having group support, but like build it around like a lifestyle course and give people free access and just have these like, little community groups pop up everywhere to help people make it sustainable.
Got it. Thank you very much for this. So now I'm going to go a little deeper on the medical side and the aspects of the spike protein. So I was showing this to you as well. I'm just going to very quickly share it with the audience as well. So audience, for the next discussion, the long COVID and the spike protein and from vaccination and how to manage them, I want to understand the latest that Dr. Haider is taking the latest approach. I just want to quickly put the context here. So various possibilities of immune system dysregulation or spike present itself causing damage. And I want to show you the studies that would act as a underpinning for our discussion. So here is a study. This is Dr. Bill Murphy. He's been on this channel as well. A possible role for anti-idiotype antibodies in SARS-CoV-2 infection and vaccination. What is important here is that the idea of anti-idiotype antibodies being present, which can actually look like ACE2, and they can bind with ACE2 and kind of act like a spike protein. Plus, if I go here to the second study, this one, circulating spike protein detected in post-COVID mRNA vaccination. In this study, for the pathogenesis explanation, if you see here, they talk about, and I've shown it before to our audience, they talk about possible reasons. One of that existing mRNA somewhere that evades destruction, then maybe dose of the mRNA vaccine, or possible, if you see here, anti-idiotypical antibodies. So this is a very important concept to keep in mind, that number one, spike proteins can be persisting, and number two, reaction to the spike protein in the form of anti-idiotypical antibodies could be present, which is an autoimmune, we can say. Then spike protein from COVID or from vaccine. So here is a spike protein from COVID. This is 12 months later, a COVID infection. Spike protein is persisting. And if you see here, Zoe Swank, she is actually from Harvard. So these are not just some small studies coming from some places. This is Harvard study. Then if you look at this is also Dr. Zoe Swank and Yonker. And this is also coming from Harvard and Brigham and Women Hospital and Boston Children's Hospital. So good study. Then here is another study which shows this one. This is Dr. Bruce Patterson, who says S1 piece of the spike protein hanging out in the monocyte for 15 months. And then finally, here is another study that says immune imprinting, breadth of variant recognition, and germinal center response. In this study, they say that in the germinal center, in the local lymph nodes, so if you read here, higher quantities and persistence of spike antigen accumulated in the germinal centers of messenger RNA vaccinees and detectable vaccine RNA in germinal center for up to 2 months post second dose. The Why did I bring this all up? I wanted to make sure that we are aware that there are mainstream studies that demonstrate or that have shown that there are spike proteins present. Now, this is also important to consider that anywhere from 7% to 34% of the COVID cases have become long COVID. And similarly, there is a percentage of vaccinees that become injured as well. And I cannot tell you the percentage because there is no government data on that one, or there is no agency data, there's no mainstream study data, which means in the US, we have about 107 million cases of SARS-CoV-2. And there is a potential of about 23 million long COVID patients, just the long COVID. We're not talking vaccine injury. And this concept of trying to collate that the long COVID is just a vaccine injury hidden as long COVID. Yes, it may be that it is managed under long COVID, but vaccine injury is vaccine injury, and long COVID is a separate disease as well. With this background, Dr. Heather, are these two diseases manageable with a similar approach, or their approaches are different and per person the approach is different? How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, right now my approach is the same for both of them. I don't know exactly how to address the differences. I mean, obviously there are some differences. The spike is a little bit different between the two. You might have mRNA, as you were saying, persisting in some people to create spike protein in certain places in the body with one versus the other. And obviously you could have lipid nanoparticles, you could have some other things from the shot that you were exposed to that could have some inflammatory effects themselves that have been shown. So maybe so the approach is the same, although for lipid nanoparticles, replacing, things that have gotten into your, the cellular envelope or the phospholipid bilayer, over time, you would hope that those things would be replaced by healthy fats as long as you're eating healthy fats. But we recommend healthy fats for both people. It's not like that's a difference in one protocol versus the other. But yeah, if you know of a specific medical approach that would help to specifically help, one subpopulation over the other, you have to tell me. Okay,
No, so I feel that the approach is the same for both. The reason I asked you that question was that during your practice, did you feel that some medications work better for one type or the other? Otherwise, I think that because spike itself is at the core of the problem, plus even if we talk about anti-idiotype antibody, that still is against the spike protein, and the spike is a common factor between both of the type of events. And because of that, even immune responses are very similar. So I would think that a similar approach. So then sorry.
The important thing, I think, is to clear the spike out of your body. And then usually for most people, everything else, like even the anti-idiotype antibodies, they diminish in numbers. So you have to get the inciting factor out, right? So there's a lot of approaches to attack the spike protein. Ivermectin will bind it, prevent it from binding to receptors. Nattokinase will digest it. I think that's been shown pretty conclusively in the lab, and we can see in real studies that it actually ends up in the bloodstream. So I think nattokinase is one of the most promising treatments. Some people, you can treat the microclots, which are a secondary issue. It's triggered by the spike protein. But yeah, certainly the main approach is to get rid of the spike protein and then try to avoid future exposures. And shedding, is one exposure route that can be a problem for some people. Or, certainly don't get another shot if you got one, and don't get one if you didn't. And then try to have a plan in place should you become infected again, right? Try to optimize your health so that you become kind of bulletproof, right? So that you fight it off at the surface level without even getting symptoms, right? You want to really optimize your health. And so part of that is optimizing vitamin D, but like it's a 360-degree like lifestyle overhaul that you really need to look at in order to really optimize your health so that you're not susceptible to really getting it systemically, a systemic exposure again if you got sick. And I think I had something else I wanted to say, but I don't remember right
So
now.
I'm going to I'll continue to ask for the various medicines. What is the role of, or what role have you found for the low dose naltrexone and or famotidine? Are these also two good participants in this management?
Yeah, so I recommend everyone try famotidine and a Claritin, Allegra, or Zyrtec along with famotidine. So H1 and H2 blockers, we try those for most people, and for some people they're just like this amazing cure almost, right? Like I have had people that's really all they did was take. I think one patient took Claritin and Pepsid, and that was it. And she was on them for maybe a month, and then she tapered off, and she's like completely recovered. So when it works amazingly well, and sometimes it doesn't work. So some people they have to use Benadryl. I've heard that some people don't get better with the separate H1 H2 blockers, and yet Benadryl does make them better. So that's something to consider trying. The other one was what was the other question? The other medication?
So famotidine and
Yeah.
low dose naltrexone.
Yeah, low-dose naltrexone, I mean, I basically recommend it across the board for people nowadays. Incredible medication that's been found to be very beneficial for autoimmune disease and just chronic inflammation, regardless of the issue, like whether it's Lyme or mold or long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome or cancer. I mean, it's really used in a lot of different areas. Dr. JP Sleevey is probably the person, he's more of an expert on this than I am. And he's like, I think published book chapters on low-dose naltrexone. But yeah, so I do use that for essentially everyone. And it's very gentle treatment, right? Like most people don't even notice that they've used it, like in terms of side effects. And it takes a little while to kind of like kick in. Very frequently, people do notice that they feel better on it, but it can take a little bit of time before you notice that, and you might need to tweak the dose. You might need to go a little higher than 4.5 milligrams. Some people, if they do react to it, the lower doses, you have to kind of microdose it even lower than low-dose naltrexone. But I think it is one of those kind of go-to things that's part of basically any protocol nowadays for me, regardless if somebody comes to me with cancer or with long COVID or whatever, any kind of chronic illness. I think it's a really helpful little piece to the puzzle. But I do want to just say that again, like I kind of have to tell people that this whole approach of modern medicine, right, which I'm a part of, where we're kind of acting a little bit blind, right? Like we are making a lot of assumptions. There's no way to know what the knock-on effects of low-dose naltrexone are, 20, 30 years from now in a specific person sitting in front of you, right? So there's always this like leap of faith that you're taking when you're introducing a chemical into your body. And for that reason, that's one of the reasons that I highly recommend people try to really double down on the lifestyle before they even think of trying anything else, right? And that's what I do for myself. And some of my patients accept it, some of them don't. And I try to do like a mix and match thing for the people. Most people want to take something and they feel that low-dose naltrexone, ivermectin are like very, very, very safe, right? And yet we are incredibly complicated beings, right? Like we have our own DNA and our own
Microbiome.
So we have like a biochemistry of our own, right? And we have DNA of our own. And our mitochondria have their own DNA and their own biochemistry. And our microbiome has its own DNA and its own biochemistry. And the microbiome is like, at least as many cells as our own cells, if not 10 or 100 times more. There's, people vary in their opinion on that. And there's so many different species in there, right? It's not just bacteria, it's archaea, it's, fungi, it's viruses, like all these different things that are involved in our health. What is ivermectin doing to all of those different little things in there, right? No one actually knows what is going on when you insert a new chemical into your body. And so things are on a spectrum of like, okay, this has like obvious negative effects right away. Like you can think of remdesivir or something, right? Like remdesivir, it's causing harm, very obvious harm, very quick, right? And other things seem to be perfectly safe, right? And yet we've used ivermectin in the past, historically, like once or twice a year, right? And now we're using it every day for months at pretty high doses. Still, we're not seeing any problems, in the short term, but we don't have any studies on you sitting in front of me, right, over the next 10, 20 years. So I would just recommend that people, when you're looking at like studies and like biochemistry and like this zeroed in kind of like microscopic view of reality and thinking you understand everything, we really have a very, very faint understanding. And people maybe think their doctor understands more than they actually do. Okay. So no matter who you are on the face of this earth, no matter how, whether you're a Nobel Prize winning biochemist or not, you still only see a tiny little sliver of the reality of what's going on in the body and the communications with all the different cells types that are in our body.
Absolutely correct. Thank you very much. So I'm going to continue to drill down various routes here. Kingpin says, what about guaifenesin to treat long COVID and vaccine injury? Do you have any experience with this?
Guanfacine or guaifenesin? Guanfacine, I think.
Guaifenesin. I think it is.
So guanfacine is the one
It
that.
may be, yeah.
So guaifenesin is like a cough suppressant. Guanfacine is kind of like it blocks certain, I think, alpha receptors, like sympathetic receptors. And so I have tried it in a few people, but I haven't yet gotten like feedback from them. So some people have reported that it's very helpful. So for things like POTS or for anxiety or for insomnia, some of the mental, kind of neuroinflammatory effects and the sympathomimetic effects of the spike protein and long COVID. So I do have it kind of in the arsenal of things to try, along with things like propranolol and midodrine and other things. Namenda, is one of the things that was spoken about by Pierre Corey's partner to decrease glutamate and block the NMDA receptor. But yeah, so I've used it in a few people, but I haven't really gotten, like, no one came rushing back saying like it made a huge difference for me.
Got it. Cynthia says that Kelly is a KoolBeen here as well. I may have missed a question. Is asking why hydroxyzine is working better for her vax-injured daughter than typical H1 or H2 blockers.
That's a great question. I mean, hydroxyzine or Vistaril has been more commonly used for anxiety, right? Like it's one of the things that's not a controlled substance that will oftentimes be prescribed by an urgent care doctor or ER doctor for somebody who has anxiety. But I don't know like why biochemically that molecule may work better, but it seems to have some effects that are more like specific for anxiety and stuff, which is probably a problem for most long COVID vaccine injured patients. So it's like SSRIs, right? Like there's all these different ones that are slightly different in their effects. And I don't know the specific answer, but this is something that's really important because, I didn't even know that something like Motrin actually has some effects for mast cell activation syndrome. And one of my patients kind of told me that like, hey, I took Motrin for a headache and all my long haul symptoms disappeared. And so I learned something. And then like a few months later, I realized, oh, this is one of the things that's recommended to try for mast cell activation syndrome. And so I think this is a great point. It's a great teaching point that's brought up by a patient that if one thing doesn't work, try something else in the same class and it may work better.
Got it. So I have a big question. This is something that I've been trying to find an answer for, and I have so many answers and they still are not conclusive. The tinnitus and internal ear damage. Do you, throughout your practice now, and reading and studying, have you found any more literature for what is the cause? And number two, what is the best treatment? I haven't seen a good treatment yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of a good example of a general phenomenon with long COVID and vaccine injury, which I find, which is that everything is kind of hit or miss, and like nothing is more than like 80% of people respond to it, right? So tinnitus is a perfect example of that, where like you'll give ivermectin to one person with tinnitus and it's like 95% gone, right, within a few days. And you give it to the next person with tinnitus and it has no effect at all, right? So Tinnitus, maybe it's like more 50-50 or 30-70, where like you find something that works in 30% of people, but in the other 70% it doesn't. So with tinnitus, some things that can be considered, and I'm sure you've spoken about them before. JP Salibi's come on and spoken about them. So intranasal oxytocin is one thing. Melatonin, there's some research on melatonin in tinnitus. So higher doses like 0.25 to 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. So like pretty 20, 30, 40, 50 milligram doses of melatonin, very safe. Can have a powerful anti-inflammatory effect and can work, well for some patients. Florian Schilling, I interviewed him. He's from Germany, and he's a naturopath, and he's really kind of dialed in to the very advanced testing available in Germany and treatment as well. And so he has some tests that he recommends for neuroinflammation. Let me just pull them up. So neuron-specific enolase is one of the tests. And then there are a couple of, I think, enzymes, KDO and something else. I have them on my computer. So anyway, he recommends testing those, IDO and KMO enzymes. So he checks for those, and quinolinic acid and neuron-specific enolase. And then he'll look for blood-brain barrier damage with S-100 zonulin and alpha-1 antitrypsin in the serum. So in cases with, bad brain fog, tinnitus, dizziness, fatigue, so especially tinnitus, he'll recommend intranasal dexamethasone or intranasal short-acting insulin, which has an anti-inflammatory effect in the brain, doesn't affect glucose metabolism in the brain, and intranasal insulin-like growth factor 1 in some patients. And he's found that works really well for tinnitus in some people. So things that are kind of harder to get over here, but you could probably find a compounding pharmacy that would be willing to try. What else for tinnitus? You were there, I think. Maybe you might have left the room, but Dr. Corey was up on stage asking everyone at the conference, like, what, have you found anything for tinnitus? And somebody yelled out, Dr. Claire Foster's half somersault maneuver or something like that. And so I looked
heard that.
Yeah, I looked it up, and it's used for vertigo. It's kind of like an Epley maneuver type thing, right? And so I don't know if that person misunderstood or whether it actually worked for their tinnitus, but you can find it on YouTube. It's an easy enough thing to try and just see. And then Pierre Corey himself said, craniosacral therapy works for some people. So it's really, again, this is something where you got to have hope, and you should have like a positive kind of like outlook. There is something that will work for you, right? You just have to find it. And I completely believe that you can deal with it. I actually have one patient who has tinnitus, and he's able to somehow focus on it and through some sort of biofeedback, just make it go down and disappear himself, his own mind is able to control it. And so, theoretically you could have damage to specific, receptors in your ear, and maybe he's able to train his brain to shut off the signals from those receptors. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing.
Brain plasticity is a big area of research nowadays, so much so that there is a research from, I believe, I forgot the university name. It is in Toronto, very big university, where they retrained a person's tongue, who the person was blind. They retrained his tongue with a set of so there was a camera, and with the camera there is a tiny plate attached that shows the camera's eye as a electrical signal, and he puts that on his tongue, and he can see by the camera signals on the tongue, and he has been able to connect his visual system to that. And he started, so they gave him a barriers course, and he was able to navigate that. So brain plasticity is a big area, and I think we'll have to do more there, and we'll continue to. So then one more question, and after this I'll talk about labs. Fatigue and tiredness and post-exertional malaise, that seems to be the top problem in both of these pathogenesis. How do you manage that?
Yeah, the number one thing is to convince people to avoid things that make it worse. So there could be food triggers that you can identify. So an elimination diet might help you identify those. And it might just be that, again, you're burning the candle at both ends, and you just have to realize that you're going to need some sleep for a few months, and you're going to have to get more sleep than you thought. Photobiomodulation is great for this. It feeds your mitochondria directly. It increases energy in the mitochondria. So infrared, early morning and late afternoon sunlight will give you infrared and help your mitochondria. You have to optimize the sleep no matter what, right? So if you're having trouble sleeping, we have to figure out some way, whether it's melatonin or whether it's some medication or something. We got to get you sleeping well, right, in order to be able to recover. You can try things, again, they're hit or miss, but you can try methylene blue, and you can try, certainly ivermectin, fluvoxamine. I mean, all the usual medications, if you haven't tried them, we try them one step at a time. Sometimes, low dose steroids work great in some people. But the main thing is, like, you got to get the message, right? And what is the meaning that's behind that illness? It's like, you've been going too fast for too long. You need to slow down, and you need to realize that there's certain things your body absolutely needs in order to be healthy. And you may have to accept that there's going to be a period of time while the brakes have been hit so hard that you just can't really do much. And that's a time where you have to rest and sleep and recover. And then when you come out of it, you have to, like, solidify that new pattern of, like, caring for yourself, and you have to make it part of your life. So people do get over this. They do get over it. And I've seen vaccine injured long haulers, either way, you do get over it. But again, I can't tell you specifically what
the magic formula. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody is different. So thank you very much. The last set of questions, or maybe just one question, I actually wanted to ask about NSE and then the labs. So here is a KoolBeen asking about NSE. So why not I start from there? One last question about the medicine. So NSE works for me for the congestion, but it seems to only last a few hours, so not cure, I guess. NSE also gives me mild medicine headache. Have you seen NSE and its effect to be promising?
Yeah, so for some people, NAC works great, and I generally recommend it across the board to people. I mean, I recommend something like 30 supplements, and people, take from those what they're willing to try. And at the FLCCC conference, they were starting to recommend quantum NAC. We're trying to find it. I don't know. Maybe you know better than me. You can educate me on, like, what the difference is between NAC and this new formulation of NAC that Pierre Corey has been using and found to be very beneficial in his patients. But I would certainly like to try that once we get our hands on it. But yeah, so I use 600 to 1500 usually per day of NAC. And sometimes even, if you're finding that it's beneficial, you can actually increase the dose up to 50 milligrams per kilogram per day. And this is also a really important point, that a lot of people come to me and they're like, they're not doing something that in the past worked for them. And I'm like, well, let's go back to that thing that worked for you, and let's do it again, right? Or let's increase it, or let's, really focus on that. And so a lot of times the patient has the answer and they bring it, and sometimes they don't realize it, but the answer is there. It's somewhere in your past, or it's in your intuition, right? It's like, I think this might work for me. And sometimes you just have to tie into that, intuitive side of yourself, or ask your subconscious or something, like, what's missing from my life? Like, what is it that I'm not doing? And when I ask people this in the right way, usually they'll tell me, yeah, I've been, like, working really, really hard, and I know that that's probably part of the problem, And so usually the person themselves knows half the problem, right? Or half the solutions. Absolutely. And you just need to, if it works for you, try a higher dose and see if that works even better.
I believe in this, that we somehow inside of us, we are aware of what is happening. So last question, labs. Do you do a lots of labs, or are there some go-to labs that you must do? Or do you first approach a patient through clinical assessment and then decide if the labs are needed and what labs are needed?
So this depends on the person. There are some labs that I think would be very valuable for people if they can afford them. And so some people, if they have, the funds, which is not most people, right? Like, it's very few people actually are like, you know what, I'll spend $2,000 on labs. Sure, I want to, tell me what to do. For those people, like, I really like to get things like I like to compare vitamin D to parathyroid hormone to calcium. And as you raise vitamin D levels, you'll see parathyroid hormone levels suppressed. And so like I like to try to maximally suppress parathyroid hormone and stop raising vitamin D once we reach that point, which is usually around 20 nanograms per ml, I think, are the units for parathyroid hormone. And then if it's possible, again, this is probably like a $300 test or more, like either I can convince you to take omega-3s, or you have to see in black and white yourself that your omega-3s are too low, right? So we can check omega-6 to 3 ratio and prove to you that you need to take more omega-3, right? Or you can just trust me, because I know that like 99% of people aren't getting enough omega-3s. They're getting too many omega-6s. So again, it's very patient specific, but it's hard to know whether your vitamin D is optimized without actually looking. Some people will be taking 5,000 international units for years and they still have a low vitamin D and they just need a lot more for whatever reason, or a different form of it, and so that's a kind of a favorite test of mine. But if people can get it done, there's some tests you can do from your local lab. You can get CBC, CMP, you can get vitamin D from most labs, parathyroid hormone, things like that. If we can add on things like, I want to see a magnesium, if again, it's more of trying to prove to you that you need the magnesium, but I would say basically everyone needs magnesium. It's just deficient in our soil and people don't get enough of it. So take, 400 milligrams a day of magnesium and maybe even magnesium threonate, which goes in past the blood-brain barrier. But, we can do an ANA profile looking for, evidence of autoimmunity. We can look for, plasma amino acids. We have a way of kind of evaluating to see whether you're some issues with your nutrition there. And so sometimes I'll write up a list of labs and send them to LabCorp and tell the patient, whatever your insurance covers, let's just get them, things like ferritin and iron profile and thyroid profile and stuff like that, just to see what's going on. And then there are more specialized labs, right? So we can send off to Dr. Vaughn's lab in Alabama, I think. It's like a $300 test to look for the microclots. And this is like, a pretty good indication that you have long COVID or vaccine injury if you're not sure, right? So maybe somebody comes to you and they're giving you a story and you're kind of like, is it long COVID? Is it not? Is it something totally different? We're not 100% sure. And maybe we want to try to prove it, in which case, you can do that. The microclot lab, the Incel DX labs, you can look at them if you're considering Maraviroc, right? Or if you want to try to track something, as Pierre Corey's partner, presented at the summit, if you've been vaccine injured or you're concerned about shedding, you can check for the, the antibody to spike protein, semi-quantitative, total antibody to spike protein, which is available, I think, at LabCorp. Florian Schilling has a bunch of these kind of specialized labs that some people might be interested in getting that can show things like neuroinflammation that I mentioned earlier, or mitochondrial dysfunction. So there's a number of labs there. And then there's Sabine Hazan's microbiome test, which is something like $700 to $800. And so I can run all these labs, right? But usually, if somebody comes to me and I haven't seen them before, I'll say, you know what, before we spend $3,000 on labs, let's try a few simple things, see if you get better. And if you get better, you might not really want to spend a few $1,000s on labs. But if we're stuck somewhere, we've tried a few things and we're not getting anywhere, then maybe we want to do labs. And it might act as like okay, I really need to focus on my omega-3s. I really need to focus on my vitamin D, or I really need to, focus. Maybe we need to try triple anticoagulation therapy because there's just a lot of microclots, right? So it's kind of a big bag. Yeah.
Completely makes sense. And I think this is what I was hoping that the answer would be. I was teaching someone eczema this morning, and I was talking about it, that eczema is mostly a clinical assessment, and then here is the criteria, and then here are the labs, and mostly those labs don't really provide much benefit. So the approach has to be clinical. I feel that for vaccine injury and long COVID as well, mostly it is the clinical approach that matters, and then come the lab. So I think I heard a similar response.
Yeah, that's basically the answer is that I don't want most people to spend a lot of money, because you don't need to spend a lot of money, right? So it can be expensive to get healthy, but it's expensive in terms of changing yourself, right? It's like a high price to pay because you find it difficult to do, the changes that you need to make. but you don't need to spend a lot of money on supplements. You don't need to spend a lot of money on labs. You don't need to spend any money. Okay, I didn't spend any money, and I got better. Right. So there is a path to getting better that costs $0, and there's a path that costs $20,000, and there's a path anywhere in between, and even more than $20,000. Okay, so I've had people
Mm.
come to me after spending $25,000, $30,000, and then they spend $300 on ivermectin and they're better. Right. So you can spend a lot of money and not get better. You can spend a lot of money and get better, but you don't need to. And certainly, like 99.99% of the time, the diagnosis is clear without the labs, and the labs don't actually prove anything either, right? They can be suggestive, but they're not proof of long COVID
Got
effects.
it. Got it. So I was promising that that was the last question. Let's close on this question. Joshua Wood says, for dysautonomia parts, how often to do magnesium plus vitamin C IVs weekly, bi-weekly, etc. And once again, this is not an advice to a specific person. We are just discussing medical management. Please discuss with your doctor. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, really for everything that we do, it's very patient specific, and the patient has to be really invested in the process, because I can't like micromanage them. I have to give them like boundary conditions and like a range, and tell them that, like, okay, start here and try to titrate up a little bit and monitor your progress. If you feel like you're getting better, keep going up to the higher end of the range. But if you start to feel side effects, maybe you have to drop it down a little bit. So you have to find your own dose and your own optimal dose for something. And, also keep in mind that there may be some downsides to getting, a lot of vitamin C. You may develop kidney stones or something. So I can't tell you what the optimal thing is for you. Only you can figure that out, right? So you can kind of go back and forth with a physician and be like, I tried this and then this happened, and then I raised it and then this happened, and then we can kind of like help you figure out, okay, this is optimal. But there's a lot of back and forth involved, and if you understand the theory, that's like the algorithm that's playing inside the physician's mind, if you download that into your own brain, then you can understand how to do it yourself. And that's what I try to tell patients. I try to explain to them how it's working in my own head, so that, okay, put it into your head, and then you understand the algorithm, then you can like change something, reassess, change it back, or increase the dose or whatever. And so that's how it usually goes. And just one final thing, I know that some people think that you can't get much benefit beyond a certain dose of oral vitamin C. I have, in my own experience, this is anecdotal evidence, myself and my family members taken very, very high doses of vitamin C and found it to be very beneficial for a lot of things, whether chronic inflammation, joint pain, or like stopping an infection in its tracks. Maybe it's not being absorbed. Maybe it's actually raising bifidobacteria levels very quickly, and that's having an anti-inflammatory effect. So maybe it's actually affecting the gut microbiome in a positive way. But I've taken like 40 grams, 50 grams of vitamin C and found some
40 gram, 50 gram once oral?
now,
Oral?
actually, yeah.
Oh,
So
really?
I've done that myself. My wife has done it, and most people think you can't absorb it, right? So even assuming you don't absorb it, it does affect the microbiome. It does increase
Mm.
bifidobacteria levels. So maybe the positive effect is from that, and it's not from absorption, or maybe we didn't test the absorption in the right way, or like properly, and we missed some of it. But it's possible that there's benefit from the effect, the pretty immediate effect on the microbiome. So the microbiome can shift very fast. It doesn't take months or weeks. It can shift within hours. If you give it something that it likes to eat, it will upregulate. It'll increase the levels. So but for some people, they need the IV for certain issues or certain conditions. The IV is certainly going to work in a different way. You're getting all of it into your bloodstream, and it has a different effect than oral vitamin C. Same with magnesium. You can get into a bath with some magnesium salts. You can take magnesium orally, and you can take it IV. And so there will be different benefits from different routes of administration. And there's usually a placebo effect involved with more invasive procedures, which is fine, right? If you can trigger a placebo effect, trigger it, right? More power to you. Try
Yeah.
increase as
Yeah.
many placebo effects as you can.
Absolutely. I actually like that. So, with this, thank you so much for your time, actually, ample time, and the insights and the guidance. And thank you very much for continuing to grow. I have been observing you practice, and you have always been hungry for more knowledge and for more ways that you can help your patients. And now I'm seeing you just knocking out of the water by the functional aspects and life choice aspects. I'm just totally a fan of yours. And of course, you are my doctor as well. So thank you very much that. And there is no other for the KoolBeens here. There are no strings attached when I promote Dr. Haider's work. I don't get any commissions or anything. This is what I get. He comes in and joins us and we talk with you. So Dr. Haider, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And KoolBeens, thank you very much. So we will not do an evening lecture. We would just leave it on this one. And I would see you tomorrow or Monday. Thank you and bye for now.